Best of luck, old man. Ethan sneered as he slid the termination papers across the table. After 25 years of building this firm, after countless nights when I traded family dinners for fluorescent lights, they discarded me like a broken chair. HR called it necessary downsizing, but I knew better. I saw the smirk, the gleam in Ethan's eyes. He thought he had won. He thought my silence meant defeat. But as I signed my name, a calm smile crept across my face. Because little did he know, I carried a secret powerful enough to bring everything crashing down. For 25 years, I had walked through the same revolving glass doors every morning at 7:15. The lobby smelled of polished marble and burnt coffee, a scent so familiar it had almost become part of me. I had given this firm everything. My time, my health, my family's milestones. Somewhere along the way, the office stopped being just a job. It became my second home, a place I thought I belonged. At first, it felt worth it. Clients shook my hand with genuine gratitude. They trusted me not because of the company's logo, but because of Richard Cole, the man who answered calls at midnight, the man who showed up at their children's weddings, the man who remembered anniversaries better than his own. I had built bonds stronger than contracts, and the company knew it. Or at least they pretended to. One evening, I came home late. Again. The house was dark, except for the small lamp in Emily's room. Linda told me our daughter had left something on my desk. I walked in quietly, careful not to wake her, and found a folded piece of paper. In Emily's careful handwriting were the words, "Dad, I think you love the company more than me." My chest tightened, and for the first time in years, I wondered if I had been fighting for the wrong things. But the very next morning, I was back at my desk, hunched over a stack of contracts. That was my curse. Loyalty so deep it bordered on blindness. As I reviewed the documents, a clause caught my eye. A loophole. Dangerous. Costly. It was the kind of flaw that could sink a deal and stain the firm's reputation. Instinct told me to fix it, to bring it up immediately. Instead, my supervisor leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "Leave it. We'll handle it later." His eyes carried a warning, not advice. I swallowed the words clawing up my throat. That silence. It tasted like betrayal of everything I believed in. In the following weeks, small cracks began to show. At a board meeting, I pitched an idea I had spent nights refining. I had charts, projections, a clear path to growth. But before I could finish, Ethan Blackwell, newly promoted, sharp suit, sharper smile, interrupted. He repackaged my proposal in slicker words, presented it as his own, and the room nodded in approval. Applause erupted, not for me, but for him. I sat frozen, my jaw clenched. No one looked at me. It was as if I had vanished. That evening, I called my mother. She was 80 now, her voice still strong, but edged with fatigue. "Richard," she said, "you've given them your whole life. Why are you still just an employee? 25 years and not even a partner's chair?" I had no answer. Her disappointment weighed heavier than the silence on the line. The next day, my unease grew sharper. Walking past a cafe near the office, I spotted Ethan at a corner table. Across from him sat one of my oldest clients, a man who had trusted me for decades. Ethan leaned in, laughing, his hand on the contract I had negotiated years ago. My heart hammered. It wasn't coincidence. He was courting my clients, dismantling the very foundation I had built brick by brick. I wrestled with the decision, confront him and risk looking paranoid, or stay silent and preserve my dignity. Either way, I felt the ground shifting beneath me. The firm I had once considered family was no longer mine. Late one night, the office empty, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A voice I didn't recognize said only this: "Termination package. Richard Cole. It's already in motion." The line went dead. My hand trembled around the receiver, a chill crawling up my spine. And when I walked into the office the next morning, Ethan was already there, leaning against the conference room door. His gaze was steady, his smile too practiced. There was something in his eyes. Not triumph yet, but calculation. Like a man studying the final move of a game he thought he had already won. The whisper from that late-night call lingered in my mind, poisoning every interaction at the firm. Each glance, each hushed conversation in the hallway felt sharpened against me. Soon, the truth began to unravel. The plan to push me out wasn't sudden. It had been orchestrated months in advance. I discovered neatly scheduled transition notes attached to accounts I had managed for decades, quietly reassigned without my knowledge. I confronted Sandra in HR, asking why my name was missing from a client report. She smiled in that polished way HR directors mastered. "We're restructuring responsibilities," she said. Her tone was syrupy, but the look in her eyes was icy. She wasn't a bystander. She was part of it. Ethan had his claws in her, too. My termination wasn't an accident. It was a joint performance, staged carefully enough to strip me of dignity while cloaked in legality. That night, Linda found me in the kitchen with a half-empty bottle of whiskey. She leaned against the counter, arms folded, her face caught between anger and worry. "This isn't you," she whispered. I wanted to tell her everything, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I poured another glass. The man who had always preached integrity was now drowning in silence. The next morning, a client called my direct line. "Richard," he said, confusion heavy in his voice. "Is it true? Are you leaving? They said Ethan would be taking over our account." My stomach knotted. Ethan hadn't even waited for me to be gone before claiming what I had built. He was already grooming my clients to forget me. I hung up, chest pounding, and returned to my desk. That was when I saw it. An email thread left open on a shared printer tray. The subject line read, "Transition Plan, Phase 2. My eyes scanned down the page, each bullet point stabbing like a knife. Names of clients I had nurtured for years were neatly listed under Ethan's future portfolio. He wasn't stealing. He was inheriting. They had planned my erasure so thoroughly, it felt like I had never existed. I knew then I couldn't just sit quietly and let it happen. If they wanted to erase me, I would leave a mark deep enough they could never scrub it out. I started small, saving copies of emails, contracts, and internal memos that revealed inconsistencies and quiet manipulations. I archived them in a private drive, careful not to trigger suspicion. Each file was a thread in a net I was weaving, one strong enough to catch Ethan and everyone pulling his strings. One evening, as I sat in my office pretending to draft notes, a young analyst slipped a folded envelope onto my desk. He didn't say a word, just gave me a nervous nod and walked away. Inside were printed screenshots, Ethan and Sandra exchanging messages about how to accelerate Richard's exit and ensure client loyalty transferred smoothly. My hands shook as I held the pages. I wasn't paranoid. I was being executed. At home, Emily caught me sitting in the living room, staring blankly at those papers. "Dad," she asked softly, "are you getting fired?" The innocence in her voice cut deeper than any boardroom betrayal. I couldn't lie to her, but I couldn't bear the truth either. So I stayed silent, and she understood more from that silence than I ever wanted her to. The dilemma haunted me. Should I act now, expose Ethan with the evidence I had, or wait until I had enough to bring the entire house down in one devastating blow? Acting too soon might make me look bitter, desperate. Waiting too long could mean losing everything. The next morning, I stepped into the elevator. As the door slid shut, Ethan entered, just the two of us. He adjusted his tie, leaned casually against the wall, and looked at me with that same smug confidence. Then, without a word, he smiled. Not friendly, not polite, something colder. It was the smile of a man who believed the game was already his. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't just removing me. He was savoring it. The summons came on a Tuesday morning, delivered by Sandra with a tight smile. Board meeting. 11 sharp? She didn't need to say more. I already knew. The air in the conference room was heavy when I stepped inside, the blinds drawn against the sunlight as if to keep the truth from leaking out. Charles Donovan sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. Ethan lounged to his right, that same practiced smile carved into his lips. "Richard," Charles began, "serious allegations have been raised regarding your handling of the Hollis contract. It seems there were errors, deliberate omissions." The words hung in the air like smoke. My pulse quickened. The very clause I had tried to correct weeks ago, the one I was told to ignore, had been twisted into evidence against me. Ethan slid a folder across the table. "We have documentation. It doesn't look good." Inside were doctored memos, signatures forged to mimic mine. My stomach churned. They had set the trap long ago, and now they were springing it with perfect timing. Then, from the back of the room, a voice spoke. "That's not right." Heads turned. It was Martin Hayes, a colleague I hadn't spoken to in months. He stepped forward, trembling slightly but resolute. "I was there when Richard flagged the error. He wanted to fix it. He was told not to." Silence swept the room. For a moment, the fortress Ethan had built cracked. Ethan recovered quickly, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "Look, Richard, no one wants this to get ugly. You've given a lot to the firm. Just sign the acknowledgement of responsibility. Take a quiet exit, and I'll make sure your family is taken care of. Your daughter won't want for anything." His eyes locked onto mine, daring me to weigh honor against security. If it were you, would you sacrifice your dignity to shield your family? Or would you risk everything to stand against men like him? I felt every gaze in the room pressing on me. I took a long breath, closed the folder, and pushed it back across the table. Then I rose from my chair. The weight that had bent my shoulders for months seemed to fall away. I looked directly at Ethan, and a cold smile spread across my face. "You'll see soon enough?" The room rustled with confusion as I walked out, leaving them grasping for control of a narrative that was no longer theirs. The very next day, I began reaching out to my oldest clients. Quiet calls, private meetings. I didn't beg them to leave the firm. I didn't need to. I simply told them the truth, that trust no longer lived within those walls. One by one, accounts began to close. Contracts dissolved like sand slipping through fingers. What Ethan and Sandra didn't understand was that loyalty couldn't be stolen. It had to be earned, and mine had been built over decades of sweat and sacrifice. Then something unexpected happened. A few clients contacted me first. They said they'd heard whispers of my departure and refused to stay with a company that betrayed its own. "Wherever you go, Richard, we'll follow," one of them said. Their faith ignited something inside me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding, not for the company, but for myself. At home, Emily noticed the change in me. One evening, after another round of hushed phone calls, she sat on the couch with her sketchbook and looked at me carefully. "Promise me something, Dad," she said. "Promise you won't miss my birthday this year." I knelt down, pulled her into my arms, and whispered, "I promise. Never again." For the first time in a long while, I meant it. But shadows lingered. A few nights later, I stepped outside to take out the trash and felt it, that sensation of being watched. Across the street, a car idled with its headlights dimmed. A silhouette sat behind the wheel, unmoving. When I turned toward it, the engine roared to life and the car slipped away into the darkness. My skin prickled. Someone was tracking me. The war I had started was no longer just about clients and contracts. It was personal now, and I wasn't the only one preparing for the next move. The first cracks showed on a Monday morning. By noon, 2 major clients had officially withdrawn their accounts. By Friday, nearly a dozen followed. Ethan tried to spin it as market volatility, but the truth was louder than his excuses. These weren't random losses. They were deliberate exits, each one a strike against the very empire he thought he controlled. The media picked it up quickly. Headlines flashed across financial outlets. Blackwell and Donovan bleeding clients. Trust shattered at leading firm. Stock prices nosedived in real time, each tick downward echoing like a hammer against steel. Employees whispered in corridors, eyes darting, their confidence unraveling with every breaking story. I should have felt pure triumph, but the satisfaction was laced with tension. At night, Linda would sit across from me at the dinner table, her fork untouched. "Richard," she said one evening, her voice trembling, "are you sure they won't come after you? Men like Ethan don't lose quietly." I tried to reassure her, but the truth was, I didn't know. Shadows outside our house lingered too long. The phone rang at odd hours with no one on the line. Victory, it seemed, carried its own dangers. Then came the unexpected twist. New documents surfaced, internal memos, payment trails, released anonymously to the press. They revealed systemic malpractice far beyond Ethan's schemes. It was information I didn't leak. Someone else was striking from the shadows. Another player in the game. The firm wasn't just unraveling, it was imploding. Inside the boardroom, chaos reigned. Reports reached me of Charles Donovan slamming his fist on the mahogany table, his face purple with rage. "Fix this!" he roared at Ethan, "or you're done." The once composed founding partner had lost his composure, and Ethan's smirk was gone, replaced by panic. The dominoes were toppling faster than anyone could stop them, but the storm hadn't yet reached its peak. Within weeks, regulators announced an official investigation. Government agents walked through the firm's glass doors, briefcases in hand, demanding records. Subpoenas flew like arrows. The firm, once a fortress, had become a crime scene. That's when the deeper rot surfaced. Hidden payments traced back to Ethan, bribes accepted to bury contract violations, hush money to silence whistleblowers. The revelation stunned even me. I had always seen Ethan as cunning, but now I realized he was also reckless. His ambition had driven him to corruption so brazen it was only a matter of time before the walls collapsed. The office descended into pandemonium. Longtime employees scrambled to update resumes. Boxes piled in hallways as people fled before the building itself crumbled. Sandra, once the confident HR director, was spotted shredding documents in a locked room. Clients called relentlessly, demanding answers no one could provide. The corridors that once echoed with ambition now reeked of desperation. I watched it all from a distance, equal parts grim satisfaction and uneasy dread. This was what I had set in motion, yet it had grown beyond me. The fire I lit was consuming everything, guilty and innocent alike. One night, as Linda and Emily slept, I sat in the living room staring at the window, half expecting headlights to flare from across the street. Instead, a knock echoed through the house. My heart jolted. When I opened the door, Charles Donovan stood there, his expensive suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. In his hands was a thick black folder, the kind that smelled of secrets too heavy to burn. "Richard," he said, his voice raw, "we need to talk." Charles stood in my doorway, like a ghost from another life, his shoulders sagging beneath a weight no money could lift. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his polished shoes leaving streaks of rainwater on the hardwood floor. He looked older than I remembered, stripped of the authority that once made rooms bend to his will. He set the black folder on my coffee table, his hands trembling as if it might burn him. "Richard," he began, his voice brittle. I didn't see it until it was too late. Ethan wasn't acting alone. He was placed here, groomed, funded. I thought I was using him, but the truth is, I was being used. By them. He didn't say who they were, but the way he whispered the word made my skin crawl. I didn't answer right away. From the hallway, Emily appeared in her pajamas, her eyes wide. She ran to me, clutching my arm. "Dad, who is this man?" she whispered. I pulled her close, my chest tightening at the fear in her voice. "Just someone from work," I murmured, though the truth was heavier than that. Charles's presence in my home made it clear. The fight had spilled far beyond boardrooms and contracts. When Linda guided Emily back to her room, Charles leaned forward, his expression desperate. "We can take Ethan down together, but if we don't act, he'll drag us both under. The people backing him, financial sharks, foreign investors, men who thrive on chaos, they don't care about you or me or the firm. Ethan's just their pawn." It was a revelation I hadn't expected. Ethan, the man who smirked through my humiliation, who savored every strike, wasn't the mastermind, but a puppet on strings pulled by darker hands. The thought unsettled me more than it should have. If he was a pawn, what did that make me? Charles slid the folder closer. "Here," he said. Inside were bank statements, encrypted communications, evidence of offshore accounts. At the very bottom was a small external hard drive. He tapped it with a shaky finger. This is the real cancer. Names, dates, payoffs. If it goes public, it won't just bury Ethan. It will expose everyone." I stared at the drive, the weight of it pressing down like a stone. A part of me wanted to grab it, march straight to the authorities, and end it all. But another part hesitated. How many innocent employees would be caught in the fallout? How many families would suffer for crimes they never touched? The dilemma gnawed at me. Was justice worth collateral damage, or was silence just another kind of betrayal? Charles's eyes searched mine. "I know I've failed you, Richard. I let greed blind me, but help me fix this before it's too late. His words hung in the air like a plea, but I couldn't shake the suspicion that he wasn't just asking for redemption. He was begging for survival. That night, long after Charles left, I sat with the folder open, the hard drive gleaming under the lamp. Linda found me still there at dawn. She didn't speak, just laid a hand on my shoulder. I didn't need words to know what she was asking. How much longer will this fight consume us? In the days that followed, I leaned on the one resource Ethan couldn't touch, my clients. But they were more than clients. They were allies. Men and women who had trusted me through decades, who had whispered support when the firm tried to silence me. Quietly, they began to share their own stories, documents, and contacts. I realized then my true weapon wasn't data or scandal. It was loyalty. My secret card was never just evidence. It was people. A network bound not by contracts, but by trust. And then came another twist. One evening, Martin Hayes, the colleague who had defended me during the board meeting, called me privately. His voice shook as he revealed what I hadn't known. A handful of senior executives had been quietly feeding me information all along, hiding behind anonymity. They had chosen me as the one who could finish what they couldn't. I wasn't alone in this war. I was the face of a rebellion that had been simmering for years. Later that week, I visited my mother. She sat by the window, frail but sharp-eyed. When I told her pieces of what had happened, she reached for my hand. "Richard," she said softly, "you've done what your father never dared. You stood up to men who thought they were untouchable." Her words anchored me, reminding me that this fight was more than survival. It was legacy. Yet the decision still loomed like a storm cloud. The hard drive burned in my desk drawer, a silent demand for judgment. If I released everything, Ethan and his backers would fall, but so would countless innocents tethered to their system. If I withheld it, I might protect the innocent, but allow corruption to survive another day. One night, as I sat alone in my study, the drive in my hand, I whispered to the empty room, "Do I burn the forest to kill the wolves, or do I let them run free?" And even as the question echoed, I knew the next choice I made would change everything. The decision weighed on me for nights, but in the end, I chose to act. I didn't dump the entire drive into the hands of the press. Instead, I delivered it selectively. To regulators I trusted, to allies who valued truth more than spectacle. The storm came swiftly after, and when it cleared, the firm I had once built my life around no longer existed. Weeks later, I found myself stepping into the lobby of a new office. The logo on the wall wasn't polished chrome or embossed gold, just a simple design on frosted glass. But what it represented carried more weight than any empire I'd left behind. The company was built by those who, like me, had been cast aside. Talented men and women who had once been silenced. Here, we weren't just employees. We were reformers, believers in a new way of doing business. On my first morning, I drove Emily to school. For the first time in years, we weren't rushing. We stopped for breakfast at a small diner. She laughed as syrup dripped onto her sleeve, and I realized how much of her childhood I had missed, chasing approval from men who had never cared. Pulling up to the school gates, she hugged me tightly. "You really kept your promise, Dad," she said, and for once, I had no guilt to hide behind. At the office, my colleagues spoke not of profit margins, but of transparency, fairness, accountability. A mini twist revealed itself to me. This place wasn't just a workplace. It was a movement. Each meeting carried the unspoken vow that what happened to us would not happen again, not if we had the power to prevent it. I felt hope rise inside me. Not the naive hope I'd once had, but something sturdier, built from scars. That evening, as I packed my briefcase, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I hesitated before opening the message. 4 words blinked across the screen. Another company? Same problem. Will you help? The weight of those words sent a shiver down my spine. The fight wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. Months later, the final collapse of my former firm dominated the headlines. Regulators had gutted it. Investors fled. Ethan Blackwell vanished, his name scorched across financial networks. Sandra faced charges for obstruction, her carefully curated reputation shredded. Charles Donovan retired in disgrace, his empire reduced to rubble. The building I once thought of as home stood empty, its windows dark. And then came the twist I hadn't expected. A news article featured photographs from a correctional program. There he was. Ethan, his perfect suit replaced with plain clothes, a badge clipped to his chest. He was working as a volunteer in a community outreach program, teaching young men about financial literacy. His smile in the photo wasn't smug. It was hollow, weary. For the first time, I saw him not as a predator, but as another man consumed and spat out by his own greed. I didn't forgive him, but I pitied him. Life for me, meanwhile, found a steadier rhythm. On Emily's birthday, I sat beside her at the kitchen table as candles flickered atop her cake. She leaned against me, laughing, frosting on her cheek. I stayed for the entire celebration, from the first slice of cake to the last balloon popped. I thought back to the nights I'd missed so many of these moments, the guilt that had once gnawed at me, and I felt something loosen. "Dad," Emily whispered as the party wound down. "This is the best birthday ever." Her words cut deeper than any recognition I had ever earned at the firm. Later that night, as I watched her sleep, her breathing soft and steady, I leaned close and whispered, "Daddy kept his promise." The truth is, justice doesn't always arrive when you need it. Sometimes it drags its feet. Sometimes it comes at a cost you never wanted to pay. But when it finally comes, it reminds you why you fought in the first place. And in that quiet moment, with my daughter safe and my conscience clear, I knew one thing beyond doubt. Justice may come late, but it never fails to arrive.